We are now in part four of our Sartre lecture, and here we're going to discuss intersubjectivity, freedom, ethics of authenticity and responsibility, and the problems of dishonesty and bad faith. For all of the above reasons that we have gone through in the first three parts of our Sartre lectures, for all of the above reasons, Sartre argues that human subjectivity is always intersubjectivity. We are always conscious of others, whether they actually happen to be seen by us or not. Right? Just as we started with the claim that human consciousness is subjectivity, we have moved on to see that human consciousness is intersubjectivity. The others are always present in our consciousness, even when we do not see them or when they don't see us. And we are in relation to these others, just the structure of human consciousness. Additionally, Sartre argues that while we recognize freedom in ourselves and others, we also realize that freedom is of the highest and absolute value, and that as free beings, we can only want freedom for free beings, for ourselves as well as for others. Sartre does not really give any specific reasons for this. Other than that, we understand that this conclusion must be based on everything else that Sartre stated. Does he mean that that conclusion is self-evident to free beings? Does he mean that each person's freedom depends on the freedom of others for recognition, and therefore persons are interested in the freedom of others? The Sartre text is not clear about that. But there is an existentialist ethics in all this. Everything ought to be done for the sake of freedom, and it should be done in full awareness of anguish, abandonment, and despair. If one does, one acts authentically and responsibly. These are the ethics of existential authenticity and responsibility. Can one engage in stealing, murdering, and coercing or forcing of any kind under this ethic? A burning question that I'm sure is on all of our minds. Can existentialism deliver prohibitions of all the usual things we think of as immoral, such as stealing, murdering, coercion? Well, let us repeat the question again. Can one engage in stealing, murdering, and coercing or forcing of any kind under this existentialist ethic? It would not seem to be compatible with the ethics of recognizing that freedom in each being only wants freedom. It would not be compatible with recognition of the highest value and worth of freedom in everyone, and that we must treat them accordingly. But can there be exceptions made in the name of freedom to all of the above prohibitions? Perhaps. We will come to another example to demonstrate the above in a moment. Meanwhile, it would seem to be useful to say a few words about inauthentic and irresponsible behavior. Sartre calls this behavior dishonest and in bad faith, indicating that one cannot really fool oneself with one's dishonesty. To be in bad faith is to attempt to believe something that one knows is not true, and that is impossible. So bad faith always fails. So let us examine what Sartre means by dishonesty and bad faith, or rejection of existential authenticity and responsibility. Dishonest, inauthentic, and irresponsible choices would seem to stem from pretending the following. And it's only pretending, right? Because Sartre's point is we know for this not to be the case. And so dishonest, inauthentic, and irresponsible choices would seem to stem from pretending the following. Pretending that one is not free and is always creating one's own values, but rather thinking that there are externally given values that are true and that one must conform to them. Sartre would say that is dishonest, that is in bad faith. We know it's not true. Pretending that one does not understand and does not need to worry about that in choosing for oneself, one is also choosing for everyone. And that one does not have to ask oneself whether one thinks that what one is choosing is good enough for everyone. Dishonest not to acknowledge this, and futile or in bad faith, because we know that the opposite is true of what we're attempting to pretend here. Pretending that others and oneself are absolutely reliable in their commitments and are not free to change their minds at any time. But it would also be pretending that others and oneself are not reliable at all, and that there are not probabilities that one has to reckon with in choosing actions, right? It's not true that we are completely reliable, nor is it true that we are completely unreliable. There are probabilities that we have to keep in mind when we choose our actions. Pretending that one is simply who one chooses oneself to be and who one is, and the results and meanings of one's choices as actions are not co-determined by the choices made by others. Here, Sartre brings up a delusional person that thinks they are a writer, while they have not finished or published a single book, and have not been recognized by others as a writer worth reading. This person's that they are simply who they think they are. And this person is pretending that one's choices are what they are due to the actions and products of those choices that those choices are, of those actions that those choices are. This person is hard at work trying to pretend that one is simply who one thinks one is, and that we are not co-constituted by how others relate to us. In bad faith, goes Sartre. Pretending that one has some kind of a fixed essence, that of a coward or a person of courage, and is not capable of choosing any action seemingly outside of one's seemingly established character. Pretending that the right treatment of freedom, whether in oneself or in that of others, is not simply to treat it as an end in itself. Here, Sartre sounds almost like a Kantian, but without the universal laws. The last remark is a good transition to the example that Sartre offers to illustrate the existentialist ethics of freedom. We have a woman who is interested in a married man. Should she pursue him or let it go? What is the right answer? Sartre's analysis is this. Whichever action she chooses, as long as it is for the sake of freedom, that action is right. She can pursue the married man or she can let it go. As long as she does it in the name of freedom, that is right. As opposed to what? As opposed to in an attempt to conform to some externally given values. Whether from God, whether from country, whether from society, whether from family, etc. So what does for the sake of freedom mean here? For the sake of her own freedom and everyone else's, in fully anguished awareness of being okay with that she's setting an example for others to follow. in full awareness of abandonment, that the choice she's making is solely her own and not in conformity to any kind of external forms, and in full despair of that things may not work out as she plans, due to that persons can choose to change their minds, even though she has to count on how things will probably work out. That would be an existentially responsible and authentic choice.